4 minutes to present your bill. Your time starts now.
Hello, my fellow constituents and fellow members of the Ramsey Island High School House of Representatives. I ask you to consider a story, the story of my parents, who, when I was a mere child, were forced to choose between feeding themselves and me due to a lack of money. It's true. Now I ask you to consider the millions of Americans who live under the poverty threshold, while the top 1% of Americans are allowed to live in opulent wealth. Americans who are forced to choose between feeding their children and feeding themselves, while the other ones get to party night and day in the Mediterranean and in the Bahamas. Is that fair? I don't think so. And neither should you, if you have a decent soul and something of a conscience. And I know you're a lawmaker, so you probably don't, but I just ask you to consider this. I propose an adjustment of the United States income tax rates. My bill is formally titled the Major Income Tax Readjustment Act, which we shorten as MITRA. And basically, I'm asking for an adjustment of income tax rates and tax brackets so that the top 1% of earners or higher earners are targeted, and their wealth is distributed nationally, so that there is more funding available to social programs to provide for and help care for lower earning Americans. Specifically, my bill calls for for filers between $0 and $35,602 are not subject to a federal income tax, and then progressive rates going up to about 800,000 and above. Anyways, questions?
Representative Johnson?
Okay.
May I ask what percentage we'd like?
It depends on the tax rate. So I adjusted, or the bill calls for an adjustment of different tax brackets. So depending on the bracket is the proportional amount of tax that the amount is paying.
Can you give us a number, please?
So, okay. So I said the lowest bracket has no federal tax. The highest bracket on the other end of the spectrum is incomes exceeding $1.4 million are taxed at 90% yearly.
So by punishing being able to be successful, that's kind of like against the idea of like the American dream, right? You say so?
It's not punishing their success. It's making sure that we can provide for all Americans who are not able to achieve those levels of wealth, and making sure that they're able to feed themselves and their family and live comfortably.
Representative Kavanaugh?
What would you say to people who think, oh, like they should just work harder, or like they should just get rich?
I would say that there are millions of Americans who are forced to work 2-3 jobs just to stay alive, just to provide for their families, who are forced to work double, triple shift. And those are the hardest working Americans in our nation, compared to the CEOs who just sit behind a desk and do nothing all day and make millions times more money than they do. That's what I say.
Representative Rocha?
Okay, so what about those people that like started out just like that worked 3 jobs and then became successful? And yes, maybe now they sit at a CEO desk, don't do anything, but they came up and now they're gonna have their income tax 90% just because, you understand what I'm trying to say?
Right, but they've already had access to this money, and they're just like, for example, I believe a 90% tax on 1.4 million, you're still left with over $100,000 a year. And that's only $1.4 million. If you're making, your income is like $82 billion per year, 90% of that, you're still left with like $10 million, $100 million, or more, much more than that. So you're still left with that very healthy sum of money to subsist on.